Start your habit of continuous learning today. Visit nomadphp.com.
Welcome to Nomad PHP Lightning Talks. I'm Joe Ferguson. Nomad PHP Lightning Talks are a 10-minute talk that gives a high-level overview or an in-depth look at a small portion of a PHP-related topic. Lightning Talks are a great way for new speakers to build their speaking resume and for long-time speakers to test drive new talk ideas. If you'd like to give a 10-minute Lightning Talk, please email me, joe@nomadphp.com. Right now we have Eric Mann, and he's going to talk about transparent session management with Sessionz. Please make sure you visit JoinIn after the talk and leave Eric some feedback. Eric, take it away.
Thank you very much. So today I'm going to talk about a new project that I have that I've been working on called Sessionz. You know it's cool because it ends in a Z, but it was just kind of like my way to give an homage to some other asynchronous and kind of like middleware-inspired projects that I'm working with these days. But before I explain to you exactly what it is, let me explain to you a little bit of the history of where I came from with this, some of the background so that you understand what exactly it is I'm doing and why. I learned PHP by working with WordPress primarily. WordPress is a fantastic project in the open source community. It runs about 27% of the internet. But at the time I was learning it, it was based in PHP 4 and it had a lot of room to grow. One of the things that WordPress is known for is following a traditional request-response lifecycle and not really dealing with any sort of persistent state. All of the state really lives in the database, so trying to keep track of protected information or any sort of information from request to request is pretty difficult with WordPress. Back in 2012, I decided to actually build something called WP Session Manager. This was my initial attempt to try to add session support to WordPress and bring it up to parity with some of the rest of the PHP community. WordPress by default doesn't use it at all. I did propose a patch in 2012 that added a new WP Session object. I also built a plugin called WP Session Manager based on this object, and it was actually included in a lot of other plugins. There are a few e-commerce platforms that use it, a few other larger sites that have used it, and I thought that was pretty cool. The thing is, the plugin itself was really, really awful. The coding is not quite there. The entire thing was built kind of as a proof of concept, just as my experiment to see what it would take to extend session support into WordPress. So late last year, I decided to kind of like revisit my project and see what I could do to actually fix the problem. To go into some of the problems that existed and why I needed to refactor it, namely everything inside the plugin is stored in the WordPress options table. If you don't have a lot of experience with WordPress, the options table is basically just a massive key value store, which is where all of the transients, options, and configuration settings live inside WordPress. It's powered by MySQL. It can be pretty fast, but the keys are not indexed by default, so as the options table grows, the lookup performance of WordPress declines. In addition to that, sessions are created for every new PHP request. Every visitor who comes to the site gets a session, obviously, because that's how it works. Otherwise, it wouldn't really function. Unfortunately, if you had more than, let's say, 50 visitors a day to your site, it would completely crash the system because the database would massively fill up, and you would run into a lot of issues with trying to clean up your database and make sure that nothing would crash. As a result of that, some of the larger sites that were using WP Session Manager to handle things like favorite posts or shopping carts were starting to stall out because the garbage collector that ran at the end of each request wasn't able to actually select all of the fields from the database that it needed to delete. So I sat back and I looked at it and I'm like, well, there has to be a better way. And this was about the same time that I was finally digging deep into the PHP standard library. And I found out that PHP has a session handler interface, which is just this fantastic thing that I'm surprised more people don't use. But before I get into what I did with session handler interface, I want to take a little bit of a side trip and talk to you about server middleware. If anybody's played with PSR7 in the PHP standards recommendations, you've probably seen the way middleware is actually implemented. There are quite a few projects that implement PSR7 compatible middleware. And it's not something that is unique to the PHP community. I see it a lot in JavaScript as well. And right now I'm doing a lot of work in the Scala open source community, and we use middleware there as well too. If you haven't seen middleware, I have shamelessly stolen this image from the Slim PHP framework to explain what middleware looks like. It is effectively a stack of different functions that run in order from middle to the outside. So when a request comes in to the PHP application, it goes to the outermost layer of middleware. That layer of middleware will process the request and then pass the request to the next layer of middleware, and on and on and on until it gets down to the core of your application. After that, your application puts together a response, which then bubbles back out once again through the same middleware stack, and then ends up hitting the client who's actually made the original request. It's a really efficient way to layer additional functionality on an object, and it kind of turns a PHP application from a monolithic piece of code into something more akin to a jawbreaker or an onion with multiple layers where the request goes in and out. Like I said, this is a pattern that is endemic in a lot of different software applications, and it's something that I saw as a way that I could actually handle sessions, as weird as that might be. So let me explain how I was able to take this methodology and things like the session handler interface and actually make them drive together. And that gets us into what Sessionz is itself. Sessionz is middleware inspired. It's not PSR7, because PSR7 is specific to request, client and server middleware requests and responses, but it is middleware inspired. So it's similar with the onion or the layer concept. In Sessionz, your application can define multiple handlers that implement a specific interface, and they will deal with session data. When a session is being read out of memory, the request for the session will travel down the stack until it finds the data, and then once it finds the data, each layer of the stack will be able to persist the data in whatever persistence system it is using. And I will give you a concrete example of this here in a moment, but the idea is you can layer different implementations for session storage on top of each other and deal with the data as you go through. When you write session data, so you add something to the session store, that data will travel all the way through every layer of the stack, all the way to the bottom, to make sure that you have universal persistence. And every layer can also manipulate data as everything goes on its way. So you can have, for example, a logging middleware that logs every read and every write so that you can track how much traffic you're getting with your session store. You can have an encryption middleware, which is going to transparently encrypt and decrypt data before it gets stored to disk or written to an external store like memcached. The other advantage is, unlike something like WP Session Manager, which has its own API and its own interfaces, Sessionz is completely transparent to your application. There's a little bit of wiring that you have to do at the very beginning, but once you have it wired up, everything functions cleanly, transparently. You don't have to do anything. You just work with normal sessions, and PHP does all the magic for you. As an example, a basic application might look something like this. You have a couple of namespace using statements at the very top of your application. You require your composer autoloader. You tell the Sessionz manager to initialize, and then you add the different handlers, starting from the innermost, going to the outermost, and then you call session start. From there, you use all of the regular session mechanisms inside PHP. You can hit the $session object just like you would anything else, and Sessionz will actually take care of all of the session storage for you. Under the hood, Sessionz uses stacks. I told you that middleware is kind of like a stack, but the reality is Sessionz is actually 5 stacks, once again using the standard PHP library's stack interface to actually deal with the order of requests so that it can move from one layer to the next layer. There are 5 different methods inside the session handler interface that we have to implement in order for PHP to defer session management to us. So there's a different stack for everything from creating a session to deleting a session, reading a session, writing a session, creating a session store. So all of that information is there. The session handler interface takes care of it. PHP deals with it for you. And when you are adding these different layers to the Sessionz manager, it will actually populate these different stack instances. When a session call reads and writes, it goes through Sessionz. Everything pops off of the stack or pops onto the stack as it needs to and deals with everything transparently for you. Sessionz ships with a couple of default implementations, but you can also write your own extensions to Sessionz if you want to. Everything has to implement a base handler interface, which defines the different mechanisms that you need for reading and writing sessions and dealing with the session data. There's also a no-op handler, which is an abstract class that exists that allows you to manipulate data without necessarily doing anything with it. So for example, there's an encryption handler that only implements the read and the write mechanism of the handler interface. All of the other ones are no-ops. They don't have to do anything. You don't have to write them. You don't have to deal with anything whatsoever. In addition to that, your handlers will look like a session handler interface object, but there's an additional next parameter to each method call. That next parameter allows each method in the stack to actually defer to the next callable and pass control down the stack. The idea for Sessionz is ultimately for me to go back and rewrite WP Session Manager because it's old and it needs to be fixed. I do want to build a collection of additional handlers that people can use for things like Memcached, Redis, MySQL, or anything else that people want to deal with. And then eventually, I do want a lot of other people to be using this because I think this kind of middleware interface is the future for PHP, the future for application development, because it allows your application to be completely agnostic for how it deals with sessions. You just mix something in with Composer, and you get all of the benefits of it transparently after that. In addition to that, Sessionz is open source. Everything is available on GitHub if you want to clone it, work with it yourself. Everything is tested with Travis CI. I think I'm up to 30% code coverage right now, and I'd love to write some more tests as the code base continues to develop. And everything is available on Packagist if you guys want to pull it down with Composer and give it a try, see how things work, and then let me know what you thought of it later. Thank you very much for taking some time to look at Sessionz. I really hope it's something that's going to help you out. My name is Eric Mann. I'm on Twitter @EricMann. If you have any questions, my blog is ttmn.io, and I am a Tecton at TOSNI working on security and privacy and cryptography. So if you ever have any questions about privacy, security, or cryptography, feel free to let me know. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us for another Nomad PHP Lightning Talk. If you'd like to give a Lightning Talk, please email me, joe@nomadphp.com. Please make sure you visit Joined In and leave Eric some feedback.